NOW.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're joined on the telephone by David Bacon, veteran labor journalist who writes for a number of publications, including The Nation and The Progressive. He is also a programmer on Pacifica Station KPFA in Berkeley. Author of a number of books, including The Children of NAFTA. His new book will be called Communities Without Borders. He was in Los Angeles yesterday. Our guests in studio are Javier Rodriguez in Los Angeles and Justino Rodriguez here in New York. David Bacon, thank you for joining us. Can you link what we're seeing in this country, millions of people on the streets in this latest May Day protest, to the greater story of the trade agreements in the Americas?
Sure, Amy. In fact, I think a lot of the people in the two huge marches here in Los Angeles did that themselves. For the first time, I saw lots of people carrying signs that said no guest worker programs. And this was, I think, different and something that went beyond what we've seen before, because really we've been told now by Congress for quite a while that the only alternative to the odious Sensenbrenner bill, which would criminalize 12 million people, is to allow Congress, the Senate specifically, to pass enormous guest worker programs and in fact force people who are here without papers to become guest workers as the price of legalization. And there were many, many people, including speakers up on the stage, also condemning this idea. Really, what's going on here is that the trade agreements like NAFTA and this neoliberal free trade regime is displacing enormous numbers of people around the world, so that worldwide there are about 170 million people living outside the countries in which they were born, and overwhelmingly this is due to the kind of enforced poverty that this free trade regime is producing. But what is really kind of new here is that the corporate elite, large corporations, are now seeing this flow of people as something that can be used as a whole new source of profit, so that we see proposals for programs like guest worker programs in a number of different countries. In Britain, for instance, this is called managed migration, and we see the same thing in Europe. And in fact, at the W.T.O negotiations in Hong Kong, there was a formal proposal introduced called Mode 4, which essentially would set up a huge new international guest worker program. So migration has always been part of the free trade regime because of the fact that the imposition of this regime displaces people. But now it's becoming even more a part of this regime because really, in a sense, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, financial institutions, large corporations see migration itself as being something that they can turn to a profit.
But, David, among the national leaders who have participated in some of these demonstrations, Jesse Jackson has been one of the few, as he spoke at yesterday's rally, who has linked the issue of globalization and the increasing emphasis on mobility of capital, while at the same time there's constant restrictions and walls and put around labor's ability to be mobile. Your sense of how the political leadership in the country is trying to, in essence, restrict this debate and around sort of catchphrases that create heat but not much light on the issue?
Well, I think Jackson and the AFL-CIO both, for instance, first of all, they accept the existence of this flow of people. In other words, as opposed to restrictionists in this country who would say, well, okay, let's try and stop it, which is not only impossible, but leads to, really very repressive measures like the Sensenbrenner bill. What they're saying is people need to be free and equal. So the proposal, for instance, from the AFL-CIO is saying essentially people need green cards. In fact, I think this is what people out in the streets are saying as well too. You see signs that say not only we want equality, but signs that say we want amnesty. And what people are saying when they use the word amnesty is not forgiveness for a particular crime, but simply the idea that, as in 1986, that the only way to resolve the situation of the people who are here without papers is simply to give people papers. In other words, to give people green cards. So I think this is the way in which people like Jackson, people like the AFL-CIO are envisioning that we can both recognize the flow of people that's coming across borders and offer people some opportunity to be parts, be equal here in this country, as opposed to the kind of second-class status that would be imposed on people by this kind of corporate program. But clearly, we also need to take a look at the kind of free trade treaties and the kind of free trade regime that we have set up around the world and begin to dismantle it, because until we kind of undo the unequal arrangements that are imposed by NAFTA and CAFTA and the free trade area of the Americas and the structural adjustment programs that enforce poverty on countries around the world, then this flow of migrants, this forcible flow of migrants, is not going to stop.
David Bacon,
people in other countries are doing that too.
I wanted to ask you, David, in Bolivia, the President Morales marked May Day by announcing the nationalization of the country's natural gas fields and refineries. The Bolivian government has also just agreed to join a new trade pact with Cuba and Venezuela. Morales signed the agreement in Havana, where he met with Venezuela's President Chavez and Cuba's Fidel Castro. The countries are hoping that Latin American nations will defy the United States and join what they call the Bolivarian alternative for the Americas. How does that compare to NAFTA?
Well, I think that is the alternative. In other words, economic development in countries from Bolivia and Cuba, Venezuela, and eventually, I think Mexico too, of economic development to benefit the residents of those countries rather than for the profit of foreign corporations that invest in those countries in pursuit of essentially low wages. So what they're doing is they're presenting an economic alternative, and I think that for people who support the rights of immigrants here in the United States, I think this is something that we seriously have to take a look at, because until countries in Latin America, for instance, are free to be able to establish a course of economic development which lifts the living standards of their own people without, the pressure of the IMF and the World Bank and the United States trying to enforce poverty as a means of profit for corporations. Until countries are free to do that, people will continue to be displaced. And of course, where do we think the people displaced by structural adjustment programs are going to go?
And finally, Javier Rodriguez, we only have about a minute left, but could you give us a sense of where the movement, the immigrant rights movement, will go from here?
I believe, Juan, that we're going to cautiously await the next few days in order to find out what the response is going to be from the establishment, from up in Washington, just as we did after March 25th. Then they put legalization on the table. We're going to see if there's been any improvement on their vision. The other is that we're going to see what the people want us to do. We're going to be polling, you could say, talking to the people themselves, and see where we go.
Juan, just one point here in New York. We watched and played for our viewers and listeners politicians addressing these massive crowds. There's nothing a politician likes more unless they're protesting against them. So you had Bamako Velasquez, you had Obama, Senator Obama in Chicago, as well as Congressmember Gutierrez. In Los Angeles, the mayor, Villaraigosa, of course, is very much a part of this. But here in New York, where are the so-called leaders?
Well, yes, but in Los Angeles, the mayor was not supporting the boycott here, but he did come out for the rally.
But even people in New York who were not boycotting were there for the
But you
rally.
had a situation in New York where Senator Hillary Clinton on April 10th spoke at a big rally, and immigrants then the following day she comes out in strong support of this new version of the Chinese Wall, the Great Wall of China, right here in the United States. So that you have these politicians that are attempting to play both sides of this issue and different constituencies, and most stayed away, except for the members of the Black and Latino and Asian caucus of the state legislature of New York, who amazingly walked out of the legislature